That makes sense. And I could see how there would be kind of a pile on effect. And if I hear some negative message at home, maybe, and I get that maybe even one other place or two other places, friends, school, community, that could really be debilitating potentially for some people, particularly as you said, when you're young and you don't have the ability to abstract and kind of look out from the outside in and kind of analyze and question some of those things.
Well, and another thing that just popped into my head while you were talking is kind of, and the messages that we've already internalized. Sometimes the way we bring those messages into our relationships with other people start to shape their understanding of who we are. And that can perpetuate something too. And so if I'm telling my friends, oh gosh, I'm such a serious duck. I wish I could learn to lighten up. I really need to be more like you, right? Then my friend is maybe learning to think of me in a certain way in those terms too. And maybe they're encouraging me to try to get me to lighten up. They're trying to help me access what I'm claiming I want to be able to, when in fact, like the deeper message or the more authentic experience would be if my friend knew that what I really needed was somebody to help me trust my introversion, to trust that more contemplative aspect of my personality and say, oh, I don't know. Sure, you could do that, but I love that part of you that's kind of more introverted in this way and that way. And then they're helping me maybe come back to myself. So I think all of these things are just so interesting in terms of like the ways that we again kind of like think of ourselves, talk to ourselves about ourselves, and talk about ourselves to other people, and what that can perpetuate or interrupt.
That's yeah, really. It reminds me of the framing too, and how from a personality perspective, most of the time stuff is kind of it's not good or bad. It just kind of is how it is, right? And
Yeah,
so someone who's um, it's really interesting the frames we could put on things. So a kid could be described as maybe like absent-minded and lacks like structure and can't get from one place to another consistently, or they could also equally correctly or more correctly perhaps be described as extremely creative and inventive, and maybe they're coming up with really interesting ways to like solve problems, or creating really sophisticated pieces of art or something for their age, right? And
yeah,
um, different families, different settings could look at that same exact kid, that same exact set of circumstances, and put kind of a positive or a negative label on it. And I would
absolutely.
imagine that's true for lots of other people and lots of other places in life, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's one of the things that I think when we can start looking at things, like we can pull away from the automatic programs that we were talking about, and we can kind of take a step out and notice and observe like what's going on in my system and why is that going on in my system, where did those ideas come from, what is all that about, that then we can maybe kind of like even start to understand how arbitrary some of this stuff can be. And for some people, I think that's very freeing in terms of like, oh, that's a good point. You know, if I'd grown up in a different family who was like, oh, you're such a bookworm, you have so many interesting ideas because of all the things that you read, right? That I might think of my introversion in this example we keep referring to as like this glorious thing, right? And so just something as simple as that feedback loop that you're talking about can be a game changer in terms of then how that internal narrative gets built in the relationship between me and myself.